Introducing our next keynote speaker, Mr. Ridham Desai, who is the Managing Director of Morgan Stanley with 25 years' experience at the firm. He heads Morgan Stanley's Indian Equity Research Team, which is the top-ranked team in the country. Mr. Desai has been consistently ranked among the best equity market strategists and analysts in the country during his career spanning over 3 decades. He has represented Morgan Stanley in several public debates on equity market and the economy. He is a regular media contributor and authored several insightful reports. Mr. Ridham Desai is a member of the advisory board of Project Mumbai, a not-for-profit engaged in improving the lives of Mumbaikas. We thank Mr. Desai for accepting our invitation. I now request him to address this audience on why this is India's decade.
Thank you very much. Thank you, United Way, for inviting me to this prestigious event. Sanjeev has put the pressure right back on me. Since he observed his 20-minute limit, I guess I have to do the same. So I'm going to talk about a recent report that we wrote, which is titled, Why This is India's Decade. So, when the global team of Morgan Stanley's research department examined the world at large, it identified 4 mega trends that will grip the world over the next couple of decades, maybe even longer. The first one is demographics. The world is aging rapidly. In China's population will decline this year. Europe is also aging. Japan is already old. It looks like a serious crisis. In fact, Elon Musk may just be right when he says population is a bigger problem for this world than climate change. Because when populations decline, it creates a demand problem. It creates lots of other issues. The second is de-globalisation. So I think this started happening about 10 years ago. Trends have accelerated over the last 5 years. It's a very different world that we're looking at from where we've all been over the last 4 or 5 decades. Most of us have experienced intense globalization, free trade, exchange of services and products. Some of these things are likely to come to a grinding halt over the next few years. The third is decarbonization, which is the world is committed to invest for a better climate. And this is going to be very disruptive. We estimate, or I should say guesstimate, that the world will have to make an investment of US $70 trillion to overcome the climate change problem, to make sure that global temperatures don't rise by more than 2 degrees by the end of this century. And the fourth mega trend that we are looking at is in digitalisation. Every business is investing for a digital economy. And in many parts, this is going to disrupt a lot of existing businesses. For the bare minimum, it's going to involve a lot of investments. And when we looked around the world, what we found is that most countries are going to lose on 1, 2, 3, or all 4 trends. China, for example, is aging. It is a loser on de-globalisation. It's a likely loser on decarbonization. The only large country in the world that we found as a likely beneficiary of all 4 trends happens to be India. So India seems to be on the throes of benefiting. And we've called India as the quintessential self-help story. India is helping itself actually gain. It is gaining very rapidly in the world order. And it is also gaining very rapidly in terms of benefiting from these trends. So Sanjeev has already spoken about some of the things that the government has done. But what we have identified is that there are 3 pillars on which this India story is resting on. And all of them are because of work that we are doing as a country. We're not relying on the rest of the world to make us a better place. The first pillar is offshoring. So increasingly we find that India is becoming the office and the factory to the world. Now we have been selling services to the world for over 20 years. The Y2K event was a seminal event for India's software services industry. During COVID, and as grim as COVID was, there was a silver lining to it, because what it meant was that the typical CEO of multinational companies started to see that it was not so bad when people work from home. And now if they're working from home, it's a lot better that they work from Mumbai than from New York. It's a lot cheaper. So suddenly a lot of work got transferred to India during COVID. We estimate almost 1 million Indians were employed by multinational firms to sell services or to transfer services abroad. We think this trend will accelerate going into the next several years. Roughly speaking, our software and other services exports stand at about US $180 billion. We think that number could be upwards of $500 billion, half a trillion, by the end of this decade. And the number of people that are employed may more than double over this time frame. So it's a mega trend that is coming to India's favor. This we were already doing in some part, so it should not surprise us. What has changed in the last few years, and I think it is sourced largely in government policy, is that India is becoming a factory to the world. So the irony of our economic reform program, which started in 1991, is it was targeted at the industrial sector. It was targeted at liberating the industrial sector from the heavy controls that were imposed in the preceding years by government. You know, for example, if you take steel, the government decided what price you could sell the steel at, how much you could make, where you could make it, and to whom you could sell it. So all of that was dismantled between 91 and 95. But the industrial sector's share in the economy actually did not go up. In fact, in many years, it's actually declined. And if you look back on India going to 1950, in 1950, I think about 2/3 of India's economy was agriculture, about 15% was services, 20% was industry. Come back to 2022, well, services and agriculture swapped places, industry remained about the same. And essentially, we're the only country in the history of the world that jumped straight from agriculture to services and never saw real industrialization. That, we think, is about to change. So, you dovetail the Prime Minister's Atmanirbhar Bharat program with what is happening in the world, which is moving to a multipolar, situation where China is no longer going to be the center of global production, and the US may no longer be the center of global consumption. India stands to gain from massive investments in factories. So we think that the manufacturing economy, which is currently about $450 billion, will go to over $1.5 trillion over the next 10 years. India is essentially set to become the factory to the world. And you talk to multinational companies, and in the last 2 months I've spoken to several of them who are all looking to set up shop in India, and you'll realize that they are very serious for 3 reasons. One is because there is legal pressure. There's going to be legislation, especially in the US, which will prevent US companies from investing incrementally into China. There is pressure because there's slowdown in growth happening in the world, and India's consumer is probably the only place where there's growth. So for example, you look at the large mobile phone companies in the world, incrementally, India will be consuming a lot of those phones, and it will be the key driver to their global sales volume. And the third is there's supportive government policy, which is incentivizing their move to come to India. So there's a lot set up here for India to become the factory to the world. So that's the first pillar. The second pillar to the India story is our idiosyncratic efforts in digitalization. It's a very unique thing. And when I talk to investors outside India, when I talk to companies outside India, I dare say they do not understand what India has achieved in the last few years via the India stack. So the idea dates back about 12 years when Aadhaar was founded, but really nothing happened till 2014. And it was only in 2014 that the whole Aadhaar program actually gained momentum. It was combined with Jan Dhan, which was to create financial inclusion, and that formed the foundation of the India stack. Now, as you know, everybody is familiar with the unified payments interface. India is less than 4% of the world economy, but today accounts for 40% of all digital payments in the world. And that's how good UPI is. It's the best technology in the world to actually do payments. And it is free. It is actually a public utility. It's not owned by the private sector. And this is an incredible achievement for a poor country like India. Now, we already got Aadhaar. On top of it, we have got eKYC. On top of it, we have got cloud storage in the form of DigiLocker. In fact, I think DigiLocker is an embarrassment to the world because we have all our government IDs on the phone, which very few countries actually can claim to have. Then we built, the payments interface, which the government has used to do direct benefits transfer. In the last, I think, 6 or 7 years, we have transferred $300 billion to intended beneficiaries. Go back to this previous system. I'd done a rough estimate that between 1985 and 2014, we transferred about $500 billion from taxpayers' money to poor people. And I can say very safely that not much of it reached the actual beneficiary. Much of it was actually siphoned away by middlemen. That is all changed because of Aadhaar-enabled payment system. We have the Bharat Bill payment system, we have GST, we have income tax, we have a whole lot of payments which are now actually sitting on the India stack. Now, two big layers are coming on top of it. One is the ONDC, which is the Open Network Digital Commerce, and that will revolutionize the way India does e-commerce. And then OCEN, which is the Open Credit Enabled Network, which will change the way India lends and borrows money. I will not go into greater details here, but I think you can find a lot of details on the net. But ONDC will, in my view, change the way India shops. It will lead to the onboarding of merchants far and wide India, which has not happened as yet. It unbundles the experience for the consumer. So if you think today, when you go to an e-commerce website, the e-commerce company decides what you can buy, from whom you can buy it, how you pay for it, and how it gets delivered. Under ONDC, this experience gets unbundled. And you will have many more product choices from many more vendors. You will have many more payment mechanisms and many more delivery mechanisms. And as I keep telling a lot of foreign investors who understand this a little better, because they identify with the Taj, I said that the small shopkeeper, the thelewala sitting outside Taj, has no ability to sell his stuff in Chennai or her stuff in Chennai. That will change with ONDC. And then OCEN, which is the Open Credit Enabled Network, will change the way banks lend money. In India, hitherto, banks have lent money on the back of a security. And that is why credit is not ubiquitous. Most people do not have a security to provide to a bank and therefore are not in the formal credit system. They borrow money at multiple times the interest rate in the country from private money lenders. Because India Stack has got all the data, it's got your payments data, it's got your tax data, banks will be able to use that data to make credit decisions. So it's about to lead to a revolution in India's credit. So that's the second pillar on which the India story sits. The third pillar is energy transition. We are a signatory to the Paris Accord. We have made commitments at COP26. We're going to move a lot more to renewable energy. But the one big difference that India has with the rest of the world is, unlike the Western Hemisphere, India's energy consumption will grow over the next several years. See, right now, the average Indian consumes about 800 watts of energy per day. And this is excluding food. Just for comparison purposes, that number is 9,000 watts in America. And just to explain what 9,000 watts is, that's what a 30-ton primate would consume as food. There are no 30-ton primates in the world. That's about 6 African elephants. That's the average energy consumption an average American does. It includes everything, by the way. It includes your commute, includes air conditioning, heating, etc. The number in India is 800 watts. And the reason why it is so small is because access to energy was not there. In the last few years, we have managed to electrify every single village in this country. Now suddenly there is access to energy. When there is access to energy, there will be increased energy consumption. And as we know, it's a virtuous cycle. Higher energy consumption means higher growth, means higher energy consumption. Therefore, we think, and I think we may be conservative about this, that the per capita energy consumption in this country will rise by over 60% in the next 10 years. So we'll be one of the very few countries in the world which will see rising energy consumption. The after effect of this is that we don't need to destroy our fossil fuel capacity. We'll just add on the renewable capacity, and that's how we'll get to our COP26 target. So energy transition for India is not disruptive. Now, by the way, when we get there, it will change our external dynamics. It will reduce our oil dependency. It will reduce inflation volatility. It will make Indian cities a lot cleaner. So there are multiple implications of this. It will also involve a massive amount of investments. We think about $750 billion US need to be invested, and we see that investment coming in the next 10 years. So these are the three pillars on which the India story stands for the next 10, 12 years. And it's built on 4 foundations. So the first foundation is the multipolar world thesis, which is the world is moving away from China as a center of production, looking for other places. Now, a lot of people tell me Vietnam. People don't realize Vietnam is a $300 billion US economy. It cannot take $500 billion of FDI. It's so small. We can. So when the world is thinking size, when it wants to set up big factories, India is going to be a favored destination. So that's the first foundation. The second foundation is Aadhaar. It's a unique technology. Nobody on the planet has it, and it has got multiple implications on how India's growth will pan out. The third foundation is our signature on the Paris Accord, which means we are committed to making India a lot more cleaner in terms of energy sources. And the fourth one, very importantly, is government policy. Sanjeev has already touched upon it, but just to recap, in the last 7 years, we've managed to create a domestic risk capital pool, which we didn't have until now. We have managed to create macro stability with inflation targeting. We have reformed our taxation system in a major way. We have lowered our tax rates, especially for corporates, and we are very competitive relative to the world. We're targeting companies to invest in certain sectors through the production-linked incentive schemes. So there have been, and of course we have done RERA, we have done bankruptcy law, and Sanjeev touched upon a lot many other things, but all these policy reforms are coming together to help India become a better investment destination. So a major capex boom is underway. There are 5 implications of all of this. The first one is, stunningly, India will account for 1/5 of global growth in the next 10 years, 20%. This is a very big number. India is only 4%, or actually less than 4% of global GDP right now, and its share will be 5 times that number in the next 10 years. So there's no multinational company that can have a growth strategy without thinking India. Multinational boards are right now discussing India very heavily, and Morgan Stanley runs something called the MNC Sentiment Indicator, which is a machine that reads into the reports of several thousand multinational companies, and it detects the commentary and then grades that commentary on the basis of whether it's good or bad. And the sum total of that is a sentiment indicator that the machine plots for us. And that's been going up like this. It's at all-time highs. China, by the way, has gone down like this. The gap between India and China is at multiple year highs. In the past, we have seen when China's index was going up about 10 years ago, it led to a big increase in FDI. So a similar thing is likely to happen in India over the next 10 years. The third thing, the second big conclusion is India's GDP, we think, will probably reach the near $8 trillion mark in 10 years. The third thing for a lot of equity market investors here is that India will probably become a $10 trillion market cap. And by the way, India has already been amongst the best performing stock market in the world over 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years in US dollar terms. And we think it will probably continue to be amongst the best over the next 10 years. The fourth is credit to GDP, which is currently only 57% in the private sector. China is at 225, the US is at 180, most of Europe is at 200. We think goes to about 100% in the next 10 years. So a lot of credit growth. I keep kidding about this, and I was saying this to somebody earlier today, that my father never borrowed money. I have not borrowed money, but my daughter is going to spend her future, because borrowing is now going to become a lot more ubiquitous in this country. It also accelerates growth, and of course 100% is still not a dangerous number, but at some point in time it will become a very large number, and then things will become a little messy, but I think it will be beyond our lifetimes. And the fifth and the final and most important conclusion is the income pyramid in India, which is like this, which is a lot of poor people sitting here, very few rich people, is becoming like this as you go forward into the next 10 years. So the bottom layer is shrinking. A lot of them move to the middle, and in fact, the top layer is where a lot of multinational companies are getting very excited. Today, India has 5 million households that we classify as rich by global standards. That number we estimate goes to 25 million. That's a staggering growth. 20 million new households that can buy luxury products. Nowhere on the planet is that type of growth available for any multinational company or domestic company. The number of middle-class households in India, which is about 60 million today, goes to 150 million. So very major increase. By the way, we are estimating per capita income for India to go from $2,000 to $5,000. China was at $2,000 in 2007. It went to 5,000 in 5 years. We're not being that optimistic, so maybe we are being conservative, but I think we'll get there, in time. So it looks like a very bright future for India, and I'm very excited. I keep pinching myself every morning just to make sure that I'm not fooling myself, but I get excited. I was in Chennai today meeting a lot of companies, and I'm even more excited. So yeah, let me stop here, and I think I'm there. Time's up.
Thank you very much, very much.